A lot has been said about the careful planning and precise techniques required for the final moments of flight we call the last mile. Brief as they are, these moments present the greatest challenge of flight, during which we must be well rehearsed and fully prepared to meet any contingency. Since emergencies can occur during rollout too, this well-rehearsed preparedness should continue from touchdown to turnoff. And yet, taking a mental inventory, how many of us might find that we are not as ready to cope with problems during rollout as we think? Supposing a reverser fails, an aircraft hydroplanes, or anti-skid fails, what do we do? What would you do? The key to meeting an emergency situation is to be prepared for it, and this means planning as if it will occur. If it doesn't, there's nothing to lose. If it does, there is everything to gain. An important part of planning concerns knowledge of the conditions ahead, and so we have numerous means of determining how things shape up en route and at destination airports. What is the ceiling and visibility, wind direction and velocity? And what about runway surface conditions? Are they wet, icy, snow-covered? Is the runway concrete or blacktop? Are there all-weather markings, centerline lights, high-speed turnoffs? And what about the mechanical condition of the airplane? Will the logbook show any items to be considered in our plans? Are there any write-ups involving engines, reversers, lights, hydraulics, spoilers, brakes, anti-skid, or nose-wheel steering? Suppose we're flying a 707 showing a write-up on number 1 reverser being slow to actuate. How would this be applied to a slippery runway situation at our destination? Obviously, we'd be alerted to the need to handle reverse gingerly, but with sufficient authority to derive the fullest capability of the system. Any condition that forewarns us of potential problems during rollout removes the element of surprise and permits us to plan for immediate responses when rapid reaction is essential. While en route, any lull in cockpit workload presents an ideal time for pre-landing planning session. This is the time to review and coordinate emergency responses related to any of the potential problems that may be posed by weather conditions or mechanical write-ups. And it's a good time to go over hypothetical possibilities as well. Assume, for an example, an approach has just been completed. The aircraft has touched down. Nose wheel is down and spoilers actuated. How would you react to the sudden roll and yaw of spoiler asymmetry? Going from the throttles to operate the spoiler handle, then back to the throttles, takes a split second. In fact, the hand could be actuating thrust reversers even before the spoilers fully react. But getting ahead of the spoiler reaction creates a vulnerability to the surprise of a spoiler asymmetry. This could adversely affect corrective measures. The best way to be ready with an immediate corrective response is by actuating the spoilers and feeling out symmetrical operation before sequencing into reverse thrust. Let's take another hypothetical problem, this one on a 707. Spoilers are extended. Reversers are actuated. In position, and as power is applied, an engine is lost. Instinctive use of rudder will counteract the sudden yaw, but will you be prepared to instantly respond with the reverser adjustment required? This calls for a clear distinction between the instinctive reaction required to counter the symptoms of a problem and the discriminatory process essential to removing its cause. The use of rudder to counteract yaw is a conditioned reflex for a pilot, but summoning up a solution to its cause requires his discriminatory facilities to evaluate the circumstances. In view of the stress of the moment, given the advantage of pre-planning, these faculties will operate much faster. What about landing on wet or slushy runways? In this case, tire hydroplaning must be considered. If there's little or no crosswind, the probability of drift is minimized. Reverse thrust, deliberately and aggressively used, will be sufficient to overcome reduced braking and effectively stop maximum gross weight aircraft within legal runway lengths. But on the other hand, if there is a crosswind and it's strong enough to cause weathercocking, there could be a serious drift problem. Recalling the vector diagrams, when the force of crosswind is coupled with the downwind force of reverse thrust, the result is a strong tendency to drift to the leeward side of the runway. Remember that recovering from this situation may require the reduction of reverse thrust until control is regained. And stopping will depend upon the application of brakes and the careful use of reverse thrust for the remainder of the rollout. What about brakes? Suppose they should fail. Fail how? And what would be the indication? On jets, with an anti-skid system failure, an ineffective first use of brakes might be attributed to excessive speed, and a false sense of security would simply call for further braking while a lot of runway goes by. But, recognizing the problem, can anti-skid be switched off without looking at it? With practice, you can develop 100% accuracy with this motion. Suppose the problem was anti-skid asymmetry. How is it recognized? The airplane might yaw and drift, but this could be interpreted as gust-induced and counted with rudder. With proper pre-planning, however, the flight engineer will be monitoring the anti-skid release indicators. On a dry concrete runway, if the indicators show release under light brake pressure, it's safe to assume that the anti-skid system has failed. Once it's turned off, braking should return to normal. Now, what about a complete loss of brakes, with no release indication and normal hydraulic pressure? Could be a faulty metering system. If this occurs, are you prepared to effectively use the air brake system, carrying out the correct procedures for the type of equipment you're flying? Consider also the problems of a hydraulic system failure and its overall effect on landing gear extension, spoiler action, braking, or nose wheel steering. Aside from mechanical difficulties, we should also be prepared for those occasional problems with technique. Take a bounce, for instance. If it's a bad one, is a go-around in order? Or has the airplane been irrevocably committed to a landing by a mentally automated process which winds up with everything off, spoilers up, ready to revert? Under certain circumstances, restoring power to regain landing altitude and sink rate will permit flying out of the bounce to a controlled second touchdown. On the other hand, if conditions are wet or icy, or the runway ahead is short, you may deem it wiser to go around. In all probability, airspeed going into a bounce will be higher than reference, possibly higher than V2, adding a factor in favor of a go-around. In reaching a quick decision, how much thrust will be required, and how much time will spin-up take? What about flap positions, gear retraction, and, though it may seem obvious, what about the sequencing of these actions? These are critical responses made at a critical time. Given the advantage of pre-planning, they'll be appropriate and decisive. Finally, faced with a situation requiring an emergency landing and evacuation, do you know the role you and your fellow crewmen will play in assuring that it is effectively carried out? Do you know the characteristics associated with the type of landing to be made? Are you thoroughly familiar with the location and operation of all your emergency equipment? Your knowledge of these matters may mean the difference between a very regrettable inconvenience and disaster. In our experience with flying, each of us has built up a vast reservoir of conditioned reflexes, instantaneous reactions to the innumerable everyday flight situations we meet. With each use, the conditioning grows stronger. The infrequency of emergency situations precludes such conditioning, though circumstances create the strongest demands for it. While a constant study of emergency procedures will keep them foremost in our minds, that pre-landing review provides the next best substitute for conditioned reflexes.